All right, and we are live. I'm very happy to have Rulon James Downard here today. We're just going to call him James. He is, and I swear I'm not trying to blow smoke up your butt here, James. I think you might be one of the world's best experts on the subject of creationism and science denial and evolution. The books you've written are amazingly comprehensive, just massive tomes of well-sourced facts and information about this very important subject. You've written, what, 3 of them now, working on a 4th?
Well, 2, and I'm working on the 3rd. Yes, Evolution Slam Dunk on the reptile mammal transition, and then the rocks were there. In fact, they're right behind my little shoulder over there. The rocks were there with Jackson Wheat that turned into a 2-volume work because it was very big.
Yeah,
and we're just finishing up that now.
So this has been one of the main reasons I started this show and this whole YouTube channel and this side project that I'm doing is because I firmly believe that evolution is a scientific fact, that it is the inescapable truth of natural history and how life and the modern array of species on the planet developed. And I think there's such an overwhelming amount of evidence to support that conclusion that you could literally spend your whole life studying it and talking about it and just, sleeping as little as you can and eating
or
as
write
little
a bunch of books.
Yeah, and just doing evolution 24/7, and you still won't have covered all of it. You'll still only have barely scraped the surface. Yeah. And I mentioned that in my debate with Kent Hovind, and because of course he had never heard of me, and I was like, okay, well, what does some big famous honcho like Kent Hovind want to debate little old me on? Just evidence of evolution.
To be fair, Kent Hovind hasn't heard of much.
Yeah, he fell right into my trap on that one. He said, yeah, let's do evidence of evolution. And I was like, all right, let's go. And of course, I made the argument in our debate that there is so much evidence of evolution that you could never possibly hope to perceive all of it. And he said, well, why don't you go start a YouTube channel and talk about evolution all day, Hovind? And I said, you know what? I will. Let's do it.
Sounds good.
And now here I am with doing exactly that, putting my money where my mouth is. And it's so great to have you on the channel, Rulon. James, rather. Sorry. You know what it is? I've been reading your posts for so long that you are Rulon James Downard in my mind, because I think that was your Twitter handle for a while.
Yeah. Well, in our little science network, they just call me RJ.
I'll try to use RJ or James because I know you prefer that. So yeah, it's great to have you here, and I think we could easily fill a couple of hours talking about your favorite.
You're breaking up a bit here, so I'm having a little bit difficulty hearing.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying that I think we could easily fill hours and hours just talking about a couple of your favorite pieces of evidence for evolution, which is what the show is all about. So with that, take it away, Rulon. Or sorry, RJ.
Yeah. RJ, yeah.
Oh. Can y'all see him? He went out. Oh, here we go.
There I'm back. Yeah, well, we can anticipate that there will be occasional glitches of this type, but I'm amazed that we can do this crap at all. So let's we're on opposite sides of the country, instantaneous communication. I mean, let's get a grip on it. Anyway, I kind of got into this field sort of around the corner years ago, back in the 1980s, when I was becoming knee deep in fascination with dinosaurs that I'd had as a kid, and that was during the time when the cold-blooded dinosaur was starting to fade away, and hot-blooded dinosaurs and connections to bird evolution and all that was just starting to hit the big time. And that was the same period when the young Earth creationists were going berserk, trying to get equal time laws in the regular bits. This was before intelligent design materialized, which is in the late 1990s. And by a weird happenstance, I connected up inadvertently with a whole bunch of little threads My brother had a creationist friend, and he asked me to evaluate a Kent Hovind video. This was at a time when Kent Hovind was just starting out, becoming kind of popular. So there was like bootleg VHS tapes that were flitting around in the countryside. And then the intelligent design movement materialized. There was the momentous time when Philip Johnson, who wrote Darwin on Trial, appeared on Bill Buckley's Firing Line, and I was a regular viewer of Firing Line. And after picking up my jaw from the floor, going at this idiocy that I was hearing on Buckley, I started studying the then burgeoning intelligent design movement. A few years later, in the late 90s, I was able to attend a couple sessions of the a conference that they had at Whitworth College that was an intelligent design thing that Stephen Meyer, who's now the head of the Discovery Institute's bunch, he was at that time just a philosophy professor there at Whitworth. So I was able to bump in. I actually met Philip Johnson and Ken Miller, and because he was brought in as the lone evolutionist in the debate. And I started noticing, as I was source checking Philip Johnson's book, and that I started noticing peculiar patterns in how anti-evolutionists were approaching what I call data field, which is the technical source level, fact level, and that they weren't doing that very well. And the kinds of skills that I was learning from history, and I have a BA in history, that's, my little thing from our local university here in Spokane, EWU, that failure at that level seemed to me kind of diagnostic of what was going wrong in people who think things that aren't true. And you could apply it ultimately just as easily to flat earthers or Marxist Leninists or Holocaust deniers or people that don't think we landed on the moon.
Yeah.
One method to rule them all is how I kind of ended up realizing it. But I kicked into high gear on this project when computer technology and the internet caught up with what I needed to be able to do. Because when I was just starting out, if I wanted to investigate Duane Gish's Evolution, the fossils still say no, the vast majority of the papers that I wanted to find in obscure journals on like the Journal of Mammal Evolution or something were inaccessible to me. No university here locally had that stuff. By the time you hit 2010-ish period, the vast majority of that stuff was becoming available online. And because I'm not made of money, a freebie, so I could download PDFs and so forth. Now I could investigate primary sources. And it's at that level that creationists are just bursting into flames. And the rest has been my project ever since.
It's really interesting because I came up with a project myself where basically my idea was to just turn my life into a courtroom for creationism versus evolution. Like the Kitzmiller Dover trial happened, and
Yeah.
a lot of the creationists were thoroughly embarrassed on the stand. I think an especially epic one was Behe. Behe was absolutely besmirched on that stand. He came up and touted his usual irreducible complexity nonsense, which
and got torn to shreds in the cross-examination. This was an interest for those in the younger set that may not be aware. That was a trial that came up in the 2004-2005 period when a bunch of young Earth creationists, functionally, were trying to slip a book of Pandas and People, which I have the copy of the whole book, so I would be able to do source checking of the thing, into the public school there in Dover, Pennsylvania. And a lot of this teachers and students, parents and the like were going, what? Yeah. And this turned into a state court case. It wasn't technically kind of a thing that ended up in the Supreme Court the way some of these other rulings have, but it certainly did get up in the higher level. And what was turned out to be the fatal mistake of the intelligent design movement that was becoming the key thing, because this book was becoming a standard of air quotes intelligent design, even though it was written by young Earth creationists and they had kind of tidied up in the earlier drafts as came out in the trial, the seed design propentiists bit where where they had removed all the creation science references and replaced them with intelligent design. Oh, hello there. Does Hovind's flood settling? What was the question on that?
He's asking if it
Fossil
hurts on
layers
our
hurt your
heads
head
too.
too. Oh, well,
Yeah,
very little about Hovind hurts my head in the sense that I know how he does his tricks. And the fun little thing about Hope, well, let me finish the Dover tale.
yeah,
That on that trial, you had a big bunch of the intelligent design people bugged out. They decided not to go to the trial. Dembski, Bill Dembski, and Steve Meyer, and that decided this was too toxic to deal with. Behe basically was the one that came in to act as the focal point on that, and he was just blown to smithereens on the cross-examine on this, where it pinned down just how threadbare it was. The tragic, hilarious error of the intelligent design movement is that both they and the pro-science people that were bandying back and forth explicitly wanted the judge, Jones, to rule on whether intelligent design was scientific. And he did.
yeah,
And
yes.
said, nope, it ain't. So
It's
that
religious.
kind
Yeah,
of thing up to speed. And there's a huge amount of scholarly material, and the National Center for Science Education has tons of stuff on involved. And I know quite a few of the people that I've interacted with, Nick Matsky and others who were, Rosen, not Rosenhaus, somebody else. Anyway, the various peoples involved in the NCSC that were connected up with that. But Hovind, he's in way below the level that Behe, or for that matter, his counterparts in the young Earth creationist movement are operating at. Kent Hovind is a bottom feeder. I've gradually systematized the whole creationism field. And the essence is to deal with the people that are actually making the original claims, the fact claimants that we refer to
yeah,
them in Slam Dunk. There's a ridiculously small group of people. There are about 60 or so currently in the anti-evolution movement, of which most of those are young Earth creationists. And then there's about a dozen intelligent design people. Functionally, anybody that posts at the evolution news, that's the intelligent design movement. Poof. And then hangers on. Hovind is over in young Earth creationism land. He was coming up much before the intelligent design movement. He was marinated in Walt Brown. He still regards him as an oracle, even though at times he'll say, I don't really know anything about Walt Brown. What? You've been citing him for decades. What the hell are you talking about, kid? But he is basically a low-level parasite who hasn't written a damn thing about. The only thing he prattles on about is the Hovind theory, that's warmed over ice canopy stuff that never quite gets out. Anybody that wants a laugh can read Hovind's doctoral dissertation from Patriot University,
oh
the
man,
track college in Colorado, unaccredited. Hovind has a tremendous sense of his own importance, but all you have to do is to look at any of his debates that he did with you, with me, with Ian Chan, everybody else that's debated him. He's got a very narrow set of PowerPoints that he trots out over and over and over again, with huge amounts of material that date back decades, largely trawled from secondary copying of other people's material. I don't think
yeah.
Hovind has had an original thought ever. He's highly repetitive and cycling.
He
So
has a
Hovind operates,
script.
yeah, Hovind operates at the bottom feeder level of people who trawl that source field. There is actually levels below Hovind,
Yeah,
believe it or not. These are the ones that you would typically encounter on the internet. These are people who have read some bits here and there or watched a video here and there, and they've got a few of the terms and tropes, but they're not attempting to find out any of the data field. They're not dealing with source material at all. And this can range in a variety of areas. Somebody that would fall into this below bottom feeder level is Tucker Carlson, who
yeah,
is
yes.
a Hovind supporter. He's a historical revisionist. There was just a show on Media Matters just today about his connection to the ones trying to resuscitate the reputation of Nixon. Oh, you mean the cinder block building on the edge of town, that university? Yep.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
If you ever
Yeah, they're
go on Google and you look up Patriot
Patriot
Bible
University.
University, it's Patriot Bible University, and it is
Yeah.
literally a trailer on a dirt lot. It is basically just a shack,
It's one of
And
those
yeah,
double wide things, a shed. You would go as a garage that you might operate as
yeah.
a place to do engine overhauls and that
I
kind of
like to
thing.
call it
Prefab structure.
Patriot Bible University and ammo warehouse because that seems like almost exactly the kind of level they're on. And what's even crazier is Hovind got his degree without going there at all. He got it through correspondence.
Oh yeah,
He sent them letters and emails, and they sent him
and
a doctorate in
yes.
Christian
Hello, my name
education.
is Kent Hovind. It begins
Yeah,
in a way no PhD has ever done.
AAR.
Uh,
Yeah, it is
yeah,
possible to go
subholding. I
lower.
didn't think there was anyone ever lower, but there is in fact a taxonomy of these things. When you get down to the Tucker Carlson level, or Ann Coulter operates at exactly that thing. She's more overtly intelligent design. That she was relying on Bill Dembski for her stuff. Her big foray into anti-evolutionism was in her 2006 book Godless,
Yeah,
where the Lord hath delivered her unto my hands. She was illustrating all of the problems of that lower level echelon. But when you listen to somebody like Tucker Carlson, he was on, I think, Joe Rogan just recently, and he was
yes.
repeating his claptrap. He goes way back. He was dribbling anti-evolution material decades ago when he was co-host on the old Crossfire series on CNN. So this is not a new concept for him, but there's no indication he's learned anything or has
No.
studied anything on it, because one of the diagnostic features that you can use in this area is name dropping and data dropping. If somebody
Yeah.
is an annoying smartass the way I am, if they're in a discussion of this, they're going to want to show off. So they're going to mention the names, they're going to mention jargon, they're going to mention the occasional source, like the little kid that would come up to me and says, "Ooh, have you ever heard of Dr. Kent Hovind?" Oh, yes, indeed,
Oh
I
my
have.
gosh.
Right.
Yeah.
And
I
so,
refused to call him doctor in our
yeah.
debates. He was
Oh,
Kent
indeed. Yes,
or
it's a
Mr.
fake.
Hovind.
There's going to be in volume 2 of Roxware. There's going to be a little info box that's going to be going into the credentials, that the pseudo credentials of these bottom feeder areas. There are, in fact, perfectly legitimate cases of creationists, both in the design movement and YEC, who have normal degrees. They're methodologically just as bad as Kent Hovind when you start scratching the details, but they're operating at a higher level of wrong than Kent Hovind or the lower level bottom feeders. I'd love if I ever bumped into Tucker Carlson, I would want to ask him what sources has he relied on, and start quizzing him to find out where his data field is, which brings us into our methods thing. Ooh, basically sent them his lecture series as a doctoral thesis. Yeah,
That's
and
accurate.
it's not a dense material.
No.
If you've For all practical purposes, if you've seen a Kent Hovind lecture, you have seen everything Kent Hovind does. He
Yes.
recycles the same material over and over and over again.
Over
He
and over.
learns nothing. One of the tropes that Joshua Bowen and Dapper Dino and various other people who have kind of fallen. Oh, Joshua Bowen does the most dead-on, hilarious impression of Kent Hovind that I've ever seen in my life. He's just got him nailed. I break into tears of laughter every time he drops into that. But the thing that Hovind will do, where if you bring up a factoid that he doesn't know about, which is like almost anything, he'll say, "Well, I'd never heard of that before, and I'll look into it." No, he's
Yeah.
not going to look
He
into
never
it.
looks
And this
into
has
it.
been a
Yeah.
pattern. The same problem with that Dwayne Gish did in his day, that he would be called to account when he was lecturing on creationism and debates, and people would bring up material to him and catch him on mistakes. And then he would go on to the next debate and start repeating the same crap that he had just been called on, because he was
Yeah.
that kind of person. Hovind falls into that same little character.
Yeah. So like one of the first videos I did on this channel was about the history of the evolution and creationism debate, because it has evolved a lot. Ironically, it's changed a lot. Like
Mm-hmm.
it started off like in Darwin's day, it was nowhere near as certain. They didn't have a mechanism for genetic
Yeah,
heredity. He didn't know about DNA. He didn't know
exactly.
about
That
the
didn't really start coming
mutations.
into where we actually knew about the nucleotide bit of it until the
Yeah.
1960s.
Yeah, and Mendel was working on it simultaneously on another part of the world. I wish if I could, time travel, go back in time and show Darwin Mendel's work. I'm
Oh,
sure it would blow his mind.
well, Yeah, he was sort of vaguely aware of it, but part of the difficulty, in fact, Jackson, we was just discussing this on one of his channels there, is one of the reasons why Darwin likely didn't really get up to speed on Mendel, which nobody was really at the time, is it was because it was in German. And he
Yeah,
was not fluent in German, and he wasn't terribly fond about the subject of doing things in German. But if you may or may not, and don't beat yourself if you've never heard of Saint George Mivart.
I have
He
not.
was one his book is available. Archive.org is just a gold mine of stuff. You can download all of this stuff there. He wrote a kind of anti-Darwin book in the 1870s. And what amazes me to read through it is how similar it is to apologetics that you would find written by intelligent design people here in the 21st century. That the
Yeah,
arguments, its origins are bust and gee whiz. Those are the two main arguments. The origins are bust, of course, is where did fill in the blank come from? You don't know that, do you?
yeah,
And of course, at the moment, origin of life would fall into that category. Gee whiz is what I call the old natural theology approach of look at this. It is wonderful. It is a thing of nature. It must be God because it's complicated and incredible. Well,
yeah,
that's a pitfall because if you start looking too close at that, you start discovering the evolutionary literature on it. And so eventually, every area that, for example, Michael Behe would be foraging into, flagella or the supposed amount of mutations it takes to get new proteins and things like that, the data field doesn't support their argument if you start looking really, really close at it. And so inevitably they will jump over to the other side and go origins or bust. So how do we
yeah.
explain where ATPase came from? Where did the first organism come from? That doesn't make reptile mammal transition data to go away. It doesn't make all the science material we have after that. And it was a revealing historical exercise to recognize that there were kind of two approaches to the whole origins issue. You had the origins or bust thing that creationists would have been dealing with. And ironically, Ernst Haeckel, the arch Darwinist over in Germany, he basically was falling into that same trap because he was trying to figure out how life originated.
Yeah.
Darwin and Wallace said, we don't care. We don't need to
Right.
know how life originated.
Yeah.
Somehow, maybe it was a miracle. Who cares? Let's just figure out what happened after that. And so they're working from existing organisms backwards. And eventually they added on the genetics and the biology after their time to where they can build up an entire bit that accounts for why things are the way they are. We don't need to know how life originated. It's a fascinating topic, but it doesn't make evolution go away.
That is one way that things have changed now that evolution is so overwhelmingly supported by paleontology and genetics and endogenous retroviruses and all of
Mm-hmm.
these converging lines of inquiry, is that now they just push it back to abiogenesis. They say you need
Oh yeah.
abiogenesis or evolution can't be true. I was having a discussion with a creationist just the other day, and of course, that's what it becomes about. It becomes about abiogenesis. And he says, oh,
Mm-hmm.
the scientific consensus is that we have no idea how life could have originated. We have no, there's no, and it's like, that's not even close to true. There's
Not
tons
even
of
close to true.
ways that life could have originated. The question is that because it happened so long ago and because there are so many different ways that it could have happened, we're not likely to ever know the exact mechanism or combinations of mechanisms that it caused life
I
to
can't even go
rise
that
on
far
Earth.
because we are advancing so rapidly in the experimental capabilities and the ability to do modeling of material
Yeah,
and the data field, especially when AI starts tinkering through because they can assess such a staggering amount of information. But the example I like to use as an analogy here, have you heard of Fermat's last theorem?
for Matt's last year. No, that's I'm learning
It's
all kinds of new
see,
stuff today, James.
for a while until my brain fried on advanced matrices, I was a dual math history major in college. In
Yeah,
retrospect, I go, "Were you an idiot to be that?" But at any rate, I Fermat's last theorem was this brilliant mathematician from out back in 1600 something or other wrote down a little simple thing about the relation of, I think, the squares of things x for a given x squared plus y squared plus or to the n, that there would be no values above a certain level for this, these exponents. And he put a little thing, it says, I have a wonderful proof for this, but it's too big to fit in the margin. And Fermat died after that. And so
Yeah,
mathematicians for centuries
I
were
have heard of this
batting
actually.
their heads to try to
Yeah.
figure out, was Fermat's last theorem true? And if so, how do you go about proving it so? And the most brilliant, heavy duty, ginormous mathematicians for centuries, including Bertrand Russell, and like were banging their heads at this issue and failing. If the heavy guns couldn't do it. Finally, in the last century, 1970s or so, a very relatively minor league mathematician stumbled into the proof that established that this was in fact correct. And it involved, by the way, whole blocks of mathematics that didn't exist in Fermat's time. So the question still remains, even though we now know that Fermat's last theorem is true, we don't know whether Fermat ever had a valid proof for it, and he probably didn't, but guessed the right answer. Well, here, what do you need to do a mathematical proof? You need a piece of paper and a pencil. That's all it takes, and brilliance. You don't need to do experiments. You don't need to have labs. You don't need to work out the element interactions in a ginormous vat the size of Connecticut and have it stirred for 100,000 years to get a organism out of prebiotic conditions. No, just piece of paper. That took 400 years to work out. So is it preposterous to imagine that when we didn't even know the pieces that we needed to look at until my lifetime, that it won't be an immediately obvious thing to figure out, and we may or may not be able to resolve it, but it doesn't make the reptile mammal transition go away.
Right. Yeah. No. Absolutely. I was just I wanted to bring the interaction up because I posted a link to an article about how scientists have created synthetic cells. They have created, a synthetic yeast cell that's capable
Oh
of
yeah.
doing all the things that a normal cell should be able to
Although, to
do.
be
It
fair, that's
reproduces.
still a long step removed from having just the raw materials and
Right.
ending up
Right.
with that.
No,
But
I agree.
there is clues as to what the hell was going on.
But the argument we were having was about scientists haven't created life. And it's like, that may have been true for a long time while creationists were
Yeah.
saying it, but it's no longer accurate. And I'll never forget the way the creationist responded to it. When I posted the article, he responded, they didn't create life. And if they did, they had to have an intelligence guiding it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's
And I
a
thought that
very
was,
common dodge, which
yes,
means that if and when scientists actually do plug in the things and figure it out, they'll just move the goalposts and just
right.
say, "Oh no, it's not a really big thing." One thing that I always like to distinguish in this matter, because it's very easy for people to camouflage, is when they talk about origins or bust issues, you need to distinguish if they are a young Earth creationist or not. Because
Yeah.
in their head, when you talk about the origin of life to a young Earth creationist, they're thinking something 6,000 years ago during the creation week. Whereas an intelligent designer could theoretically be conceptualizing it as something which was taking place 4 billion years ago with that deep time variable. So it's always important to just simply ask, oh gosh, when do you think life happened and what happened next? Which would
Yeah.
then help distinguish between the young Earth creationists, who all have to run off of the Genesis week, and so all the kinds are created during the creation week, and then 1,000 some odd years later there was the flood, blah blah, versus the intelligent designer that has zip. They have literally never thought about that issue of what the hell happened since. This is true for everybody in the intelligent design community. There's no counterexamples. They have not thought about this other than just waving little blips of things about how difficult it is to make proteins or something in a
Yeah.
abiotic context. But they don't ever work out to fill in, okay, after the 4 billion years part, how do we get down to like cyanobacteria 2.5 billion years later, let alone the Cambrian explosion, which they, of course, obsess on routinely, which is we're going to have a big section on the Cambrian explosion and the Precambrian period, the Ediacara, biota, the whole issues of systematics in volume 2 of Rocks were there. Jackson and I have been having a field day working up that chapter.
Everyone I've told about this stream has told me that I need to tell you to crack down and get The Rocks Were There Volume 3 done. They want to read it.
Oh yeah. Well, it's going to be correct.
Yeah.
And I've just been doing material. I'm knee deep in the cosmology chapter, which is not my field. I'm a historian, but source methods is a universal toolkit, so I can reach very reasonable observations, and particularly because so many creationists just blow their foot off in this area where they've got just goof up mistakes and authority quoting of papers that don't say what they wanted to do, and failure to follow up. A dead giveaway that anybody in the anti-evolution field will tend to do over and over again is they rely upon their little favorite crap. So they did some stuff. As soon as you see somebody and they're waving a paper from 1975, holy moly, there's been no research since. And part of the fun that I recommend everybody does is that when you find examples like that, you track down the original paper, which odds are you'll be able to find free online somewhere, read it to find out where it is, then track down what work has been done since, the stuff that didn't get mentioned when they waved the old little paper, because you'll discover, wow, things have moved on. And you'll learn stuff. So you will now be coming at it when you have to discuss it again. You're now coming at it at a higher level. You are more informed than you were before, and you're probably more informed than the creationist was.
Yeah. So speaking of learning and source methods, what is the source method? What does that mean when you use that term? Like, what are you describing there?
Yeah, this is methods 101. And the thing that is really important to remember is this does not come naturally to people. This is a weird little niche skill that once you realize you need to do it, it changes everything. But virtually everybody I know, including moi, have sort of stumbled into it because there's not really a source methods course you do. There's discussions about of proper scholarship and fact checking and all of that material, but underlying it is an even deeper issue that was drummed into me. I came to this through a peculiar discipline, historiography, which is the discipline of the study of history. In other words, what have historians done over the years? And arguably, in retrospect, not necessarily the most entertaining teacher I ever had in my life. I had a bunch of just really extraordinary professors in high school and college and others that stick in my mind forever. But Professor Barnes, who was a mild-mannered, quiet, pipe-smoking guy, a kind of cross between Jimmy Stewart and James Mason, never raised his voice, didn't have any prima donna qualities, but quietly he would drill in us, never confuse a primary and a secondary source. That's the opening key. If
So
you
primary source, sorry, just to clarify terms, because I want this to be accessible to anybody who watches it, especially creationists. So a primary source is like, that means somebody who's actually putting together the work that's going to be published in the primary.
It operates at various levels. A thing can be a primary source in one level and a secondary source in another. And so ultimately, when historians talk about primary sources, they're talking about documents, they're talking about inscriptions, they're talking about coins, they're talking about all the physical things, and they would be digging up the bones and looking at the DNA. That would be the primary material, and there would be a body of historical scholarship done on that. But this is a little more interesting element. So imagine you read a text and it says, Schmidlap says that elephants are a form of asparagus, and cites Schmidlap 1905. Fine and dandy. Now, this is a secondary statement. You don't know directly anything about this other than the source you just read said that Schmidlap said the following and gave a source for it. All of that is a secondary account. Only if you investigate Schmidlap and maybe even elephants and asparagus and locate the original 1905 Schmidlap source can you now look at that Schmidlap 1905 is the primary source for the assertions about Schmidlap and asparagus and elephants. And the moment you confuse those two, you're in trouble. One of the things that is a pathology of behavior among anti-evolutionists, Kent Hovind illustrates this hilariously. It's all that stuff that Henry Morse and Duane Gish and all these others do. It's the quote mining bit. Oh, out of their own mouths, there is the Darwin quote on the eye, and he said this. Who cares? Plus, the original source doesn't quite say what you want it to when you start looking that up. And then when you investigate the evolution of eyes, you find out that it doesn't matter what Darwin thought in 1880. We know about Pax genes and a whole bunch of stuff today that render that irrelevant. The source, secondary source addict doesn't know the difference between those things. They think that if they have read the Darwin quote, they understand the Darwin and I, and they don't need to ever bother anything more. And so that source addiction, the fact that you have these quote mine lists at the Intelligent Design and in the Young Earth Creationist and in these things pop up over and over again. There's a cottage industry over in the old Talk Origins things where they would track down these quotes, and a small number of them turn out to not even be real quotes. They're made up out of thin air, and yet you find there's one from this guy Bonheur that I've got a whole collection of, and in a future book I'll want to investigate. You know, this whole practice of stuff that instantly, when anybody uses that quote, they are automatically identifying themselves as an incompetent secondary source addict because the quote doesn't exist. It was never said, and yet you find people trawling around on it. The way you investigate this stuff is to throw off the mantle of the secondary source addict and defend your argument at primary source fact level. And then you have to start investigating, well, okay, what constitutes data? How do you distinguish if there's a controversy between one thing and another? And so you will be encountering controversies. There are a bunch of them in the scientific community. There's a bunch of them in any area. How do you weed through that? Now you're in the weeds. And that's a thing that takes experience and care, and plus you learn stuff. When somebody like Pelagia is burrowing down through the apologetics of religious apologists. I was just watching a video just yesterday where he was going into the claims that this guy Mike Winger was making about the prophecies being so perfect in the Bible. And when you're looking at the exact details about Daniel and the thing in Ezekiel about Tyre and all the rest, you are knee deep when you're over on Pelagia's side with primary source issues. Whereas the Mike Winger guy is just riffing off of something. Maybe he was reading Josh McDowell's Evidence That Demands a Verdict and channeled a lot of it. But because he's offering zero sources at all, you're not even at that level. And so the ability to categorize stuff in these levels, I conceptualize the whole picture in a three-tiered approach. At the top, you've got ideology, and that's the dogma statements. Then you go down to the data floor, which is the extent to which they're bumping into potentially identifiable data input. And then below that is the basement of source methods, which is how you approach the whole point of what sources are you dealing with? How are you evaluating their validity? And it's imperative that everybody play this game, and at all levels. So when I'm watching Dan Stern Cardinale do a delicious takedown of creationists, I am taking notes. I am tracking down every source that he brings up. I'm cross-checking to see if I have it or not. And if I don't, I'm adding it and I'm evaluating it. And I have yet to find any instance in which he has been misrepresenting a source at any level. Yeah. That when you look at the actual source material, it backs up the points that he's making. Whereas when you deal with pseudoscientists, if they make the mistake of offering a primary source, which they may or may not have ever read originally because they may have been a secondary source addict, they just cribbed it from somewhere else in the quote mine bit, the sources will not support their argument. And now you have measured them in a way that you can never do if you don't go down that delicious little source methods rabbit hole. Does that sound clear?
Yeah, that sure does. And I'm immediately relating it to the Socrates rhetoric, the idea of ethos, that if you're using sources that don't support your argument as if they do, it should damage your ethos. It should make you seem less credible.
Well, and
but I think it works on the less educated because they don't check the sources.
The neat thing about it is that there are aspects of both logical analysis and source methods analysis that are objective.
Yeah.
If somebody, we can all objectively observe that if somebody makes a syllogism where the original premise doesn't even lead to the conclusion, it doesn't matter anything about whether the original premise is true or false. Their conclusion that they just jumped doesn't matter. And there of course are limits to how far you can do on that, because you can have a perfectly valid logical syllogism and now you have to thrash over whether the assumptions are true or false. Well, source methods has a comparable bit. If I have somebody citing the source and I look and find the source does not say what they claim it does, or they have so egregiously misrepresented the source by that little ellipsis ... in the middle where they left out highly relevant information that contradicts the point they are making, then I am objectively observing that they are violating sound rules and are, from a source methods level, incompetent. And that therefore I should be doubtful of anything they say. They are not in principle
or
reliable.
dishonest.
Yeah. Now, sometimes it gets into some just hilarious levels of burrowing down. Andrew Snelling is just a gold mine of material in this area. He's a young earth creationist, did actual geology degrees, and that he has some just hilarious examples of where, from this source methods example, he is objectively being incompetent. One case that has been caught by people other than me, but we're going to be alluding to it in the new book, relates to this listing about radiometric dating of volcanoes. And there's it comes from Steve Austin.
I think other creationists have called him out on that one.
Steve Austin had riffed off of this old paper by I think Russell Doolittle from the 1960s. And what was funky about it is that Austin listed off these things which are like 2.0 times 10 to the whatever, blah, blah, blah. He had written the numbers down from the wrong column. That he had not wrote it down from the column that gave the dates. He'd given it for the amount of atoms that had been measured. Wrong column, kids. And so that got repeated, where now along comes Andrew Snelling and he copies the Austin numbers, and sometimes then we'll still cite the Doolittle paper secondarily, that if he'd ever looked up any of the original numbers, he would have discovered that Austin had written down the wrong column.
You know what that kind
and as late as like 2013, I think, he was still repeating that inaccurate column thing. Well, we've got a new example of Snelling that I stumbled across, which had to do with dendrochronology, tree ring dating. And there was this paper that had relied on a book that relied on a paper, and the miracles of archive.org, I was able to locate all the original primary sources on this so I could trace the paper trail through. But Snelling did a 2017 post where he was putting up this chart from the old paper that had a staircase of little rectangle blocks that eventually lead up to the things. And the implication is, of course, that the stuff that and the chronology across the bottom as to the time frame they're supposedly representing. And then at the top, as you step up, only the last 2 blocks relate to actual living trees. All of the others are tree rings that are from not living trees. So they've been layered in to cover. So theoretically, this goes back tens of thousands of years. And the point that Snelling was trying to make is that the top 2 blocks represent 2 trees, 2 individual trees. So all of this huge network of dates that go back for thousands of years, beyond the age of the earth, according to young earth creationism, was all starting from only 2 living trees. And he put big arrows pointing to them. Well, golly gosh, he'd misread the sources, because the boxes were stacked up, if you looked at the side margin, as to how many samples there were in each box. And so the farther back you went back in time, the fewer samples you had. So the ones up at the top had like 10, 15 trees per box. He had misread one of the descriptions of this, and he had got himself to thinking, because of the coincidence of the way the words were done, that they were talking individual trees when they were not talking individual trees. And he didn't follow through enough on it to deal with it. I'm supposed to take him reliably on the, oh, and another spectacular example, I've alluded to it before. You've heard of Philip Johnson, the Darwin on Trial guy? Okay.
Yeah.
In his book, Darwin on Trial, he says that he became persuaded that human evolution had a problem by reading a little book by this guy, Malcolm Bowden, an English creationist. And he knew he was a young Earth creationist. He was aware of that part, fine and dandy, about Pekin man, and he's using all the old terminology and stuff, you know, although it's a fairly recent book. And Bowden, by the way, is still alive. I don't know that Johnson knew something else about Malcolm Bowden, not just that he was a young Earth creationist. He is a geocentrist young Earth creationist. He doesn't believe the Earth revolves around the sun. Now, I don't want to sound picky, but from a methods angle, if somebody can talk themselves into thinking the Earth doesn't revolve around the sun, maybe they're really good at deck stacking an argument to arrive at a preconceived but unwarranted conclusion. And you should never have trusted his arguments on human evolution. And yet that's what persuaded Johnson to get on that anti-evolution, human evolution thing.
So
one bad method to rule them all.
Yeah. So it's crazy to me that geocentric flat Earth creationism is a thing. Young Earth creationism already requires you to deny so much of the body of facts.
Why not go one step more?
Yeah, that specific brand is just like denying scientific knowledge.
Nothing is more hilarious. If you want an evening with popcorn, it's to sit down and either watch or read a young Earth creationist criticizing the geocentrists for flat Earth. Suddenly they turn into methodological naturalists and evidence-based people. Totally can't hold it at all. And it's just hilariously hypocritical.
It's really
the very
funny.
standards that he would never allow to be operating in his young Earth creationism, suddenly he gets to use when he's talking about the flat earthers and the like, who are almost invariably doctrinal biblical believers. There's very few examples outside of that range. There probably quite a few, but historically, and geocentrism, another feature that pops up, which is some an interesting thing, is the role of hyper-conservative politics in this area. That the geocentrists movement are all really conservative Roman Catholics, really conservative Protestants. One that would make Dick Cheney seem like a flaming liberal.
Right. So the messing up the numbers and the columns thing, that is a great example of why peer review is helpful and important. And creationists, unfortunately, don't benefit from peer review because they don't do it very much. But another thing it reminds me of how like the whole mythos of Popeye became a thing. The reason Popeye becomes super strong when he eats spinach is because somebody misplaced a decimal in some American nutritional department where they were measuring the amount of iron spinach has in it. So because he misplaced that decimal, they thought spinach had 10 times the amount of iron in it that it actually has. So when Popeye eats spinach, he's getting lots of good iron, and that's why he gets all big and buff. Yeah.
Well, and you find exactly that level of dumb with RFK Jr. And the anti-vax material that you find out. That's another one that just floored me when I discovered there's only about a dozen people who are the fact claimants in the anti-vaxxer movement.
Right.
And everything else is just echoing off of that. And there is no evidence whatsoever that RFK Jr. knows how to fact check the damn thing.
No.
That he relies on that if you present him with a study that conflicts with what he wants to be true, he doesn't care. It'll just bounce right off the mine shell. And you find the same names popping up in all of these things that you start look. Is it a surprise that Merkele, who is one of those dozen fact claimant anti-vaxxers, is knee deep in the Epoch Times network, Falun Gong, religious extremists who are also heavy for Trump. I mean, there's just this
And
network of reinforcement.
they all have an alternative to sell you. Oh, don't get vaccinated. Buy my
Oh yes,
essential
yeah.
oil.
Merkel actually
Buy
has
my
got a line of like health
homeopathics.
products and the like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Buy my special
Always.
herbal tea. It's Eastern.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah.
Oh man.
No,
So
and that I have no reason to think that the average anti-vaxxer can't be just natively bad method, independent of whether they've got a financial axe to grind. But add in that economic incentive, now you have even
yeah.
more reason for them not to be bothering too much about the fact-checking thing because they're making too much money at it. And that
Yeah.
pops up with an awful lot of the influencers and others, and you would see the ones that are making a financial bit about it, Joe Rogan, Candace Owen, for that matter, Tucker Carlson, who cost Fox Trump Pravda $748 million for lying about the Dominion case, caused him being fired. He just trots over and creates a new medium, and there he is running. And he's not a poor guy. He comes from money. He's an heir
Yeah.
to some insurance company family or something. So it's not as though he doesn't have resources to operate on, but he operates in that ego bubble of his, and of course then he gets schmoozing with the Trump administration and all that. So we tick off a whole bunch of boxes of historical revisionism and Trumpista and anti-evolutionists and craven financial crook liar stuff. I mean, how many fingers do you need before you would say this guy's somebody nobody should be paying attention to in a sound method environment? And if anybody started asking methods questions, and reporters are terrible at that, they even ones who do fact checking don't press on to that point. That's why this source methods thing is something that we need to move into. Look at somebody like Aaron Ra, who has debated Kent Hovind and does all sorts of videos on it. When was the creation? Is that misread the paper on the mammoth radiometric dating? Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. There's a whole bunch of stuff. I think we alluded to that in volume 1, all the bits about the misrepresentation of stuff and the fact that creationists will be putting these material into to be dated without pointing out what they're trying to do. So they're trying to date something with the wrong method, and so anomalously come up with stuff. But even there, they'll conflate material together. They'll treat two separate samples as if they're the same thing. It's just an absolute mess. And as soon as you start looking at the original source material on this stuff, it just stands out like a sore thumb. So it's imperative that people start be asking questions on it. Aaron Ra, when he would be debating with Kent Hovind, he was saying that Kent Hovind is a liar because he's been told time and time again that something is not true. Well, remember, he's a Tortugan mind. It just bounces off the mind shell. It doesn't matter. Nothing penetrates down there. But the point is that I've never seen Ra press on. And when he's been talking with various creationists at various venues, he doesn't press on to say, okay, you believe this silly thing. What sources have you relied on to be so confident that this is true? And did you ever fact check it? Because he doesn't care. He's just stuck on the data floor. Well, source methods will eventually bump into the data floor with a vengeance, but you come at it from the bottom up, not the top down. In many respects, I don't care what somebody's dogma is, what position they're taking. So methodologically, intelligent designers and young earth creationists are very distinctive in many areas. In fact, the reason why young earth creationism is so much more fun to go into is because they trample across virtually every discipline, because they're rearranging astrophysics and history, whereas intelligent designers are a little niche subset that's only ranting on about flagellum.
Yeah. No, oh my gosh. That kind of reminds me of something I wanted to hopefully talk to you about, because I know you are a historian. Okay. When creationists and science deniers and pseudoscience peddlers do this kind of stuff, it blows my mind that their ethos doesn't suffer for this. They're super open about it. They talk to each other in their circles about how they're going to subvert people's logic and how they're going to drive a wedge. They had a whole document about it. It was an open memorandum, the wedge document, where they said, this
Oh,
is our
well,
goal.
there.
We're gonna push our stuff and we're gonna get it into classrooms, and then we'll figure out how to support it later.
Source methods, again, it's relevant because you can bring up the data point. Okay, the Wedge document, that's the Discovery Institute things, Philip Johnson and all the rest, and it was circulating privately, and then some blabbermouths revealed it, and so it became part of the public domain. Initially, they denied it, kind of like Donald Trump on Project 2025, but the point is, it's now a data point because 1999 is a long time ago. And they were making very explicit predictions as to how quickly the revolution was going to take place. And they were figuring by 2005, they would be demolishing the evolution framework, and they would have this big religious revival. Well, we're 2025, kids. That didn't happen. So they therefore do rationalization and decide, it's because the Darwinist naturalistic lobby has such a stranglehold on academe and the instruments of power that they have prevented our truth from working anything. No, I'm terribly sorry, kids. It's because you never had the data, and you've never been able to persuade anybody outside of your little niche market that that's the case. You can't even. Well, one thing I would love to see, and by the way, this has never happened, is an intelligent designer debating a young Earth creationist publicly. Zero examples. You will find Michael Behe appearing on the same platform as a young Earth creationist, but it will not be to offer criticism of the young Earth creationist. It will just be to present his intelligent design argument and then move on. Now, privately, I know for a fact, because I've chatted with Steve Meyer about it back when he was up here at Whitworth. When he would be on, like, going to a conference that would have Dwayne Gish in it, he would be thrashing back and forth with Dwayne Gish because Meyer has some petroleum geology background and the like, and so he knows some of the material that renders young Earth creationism untenable. That never percolates upwards into their upper level apologetics. So what happened with the intelligent design movement is more of that evolution of the system thing. That it started out as, you don't need to be a young Earth creationist to be a Darwin skeptic. And literally, in the space of a few years, had mutated into, you don't have to give up your young Earth creationism to join us in our anti-evolution crusade. So it's no coincidence that you find several young Earth creationists right early in the mark in the intelligent design movement. Paul Nelson and John Mark Reynolds come to mind right off the bat. And since then, there has been the reverse, as young Earth creationists have been invigilating their way into the intelligent design movement. So John Sanford's stuff is showing up among the papers in an ostensibly intelligent design book. No discussion of chronology or any of these other aspects. So this is like inviting Malcolm Bowden to do a biography when he is a geocentrist, and not noting that.
Oh man. Another, like, it's true that young Earth creationists. Oops,
I'm getting some bleed outs for the moment.
Sorry.
There we go.
I was just saying that they do bleed into each other, and it's interesting how evolution has bled into both of them. Young Earth creationism and intelligent design. Like, even Ken Hovind says,
more ironically,
speciation.
More ironically, in young Earth creationism than in intelligent design. But remember, in my old material, that's all available up on my website, everybody can download the PDFs and all that. I described intelligent design as creationism light, all the ideology with even less fact. That they don't have any working map of time. They never. You want to shut a young intelligent designer up? Just ask them, how many design events were there during the Mesozoic? Their brain glitches up because they never think about that kind of detail, even though, technically speaking, there would have to be several, because the two vertebrate classes, the only ones that have appeared in the last 250 million years, mammals and birds, are emerging in that frame, either the first full mammals during the Triassic and the birds coming along during the Jurassic. So it's not a trivial detail for them to bring up, but they literally never think about any of this stuff. You can pour through all of their stuff. Whereas the young Earth creationists actually have had to push farther into the mode because they are saddled with the double bottleneck that they cannot get around. It gives them clarity in their dogma and also puts an albatross around their neck. And that is, Event number one, the creation week, where all kinds were made. No exceptions, no kinds after the creation week, air quotes, 6,000-ish years ago. 2, the flood, where the critters that have descended from them are killed off during the flood, which means all of the variation that you can see in the fossil record had to have emerged from the initial created kinds only, 1,700 years earlier. Then only the selected groups of land animals that were on the ark have generated all the extant species in the 4,300 years or so since then. Bingo bongo. They can't move those goalposts. So ultimately,
Super duper
hyperspeciation
ultra
has
fast.
become necessary.
Yeah.
In a way that the intelligent designers don't get. They're still kind of vaguely rejecting speciation at all, whereas speciation within a kind is required on mega scales over in the young Earth creationist land. Oh, another thing too. You've heard of the term baraminology at all?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the young Earth creationist attempt to do systematics. Baramins are created kinds. It was a word coined by Marsh guy back in the 1940s, but only kind of got serious when the new breed, the Young Turks, Todd Wood and Kurt Wise and all the rest, started doing serious baraminology starting in like the 1990s on. And there's not a huge body of material on that. They're barely tiptoeing into a lot of the areas, but there is zero counterpart of that in the intelligent design or old Earth creationist movement. Never do any of them ever say if anything is related to anything else. There is zero systematics. This has been just glaring. At least the young Earth creationists take a stab at it.
Yeah.
They burst into flames, but they at least try.
Right. So we've talked a lot about source methods and the data floor. Well, we talked more about source methods. What and I wanted to ask you this because I know you've written books on the subject. What is the data that you think is the best evidence for evolution? And I think I know the answer.
I love to have go-tos. And for evolution, I've got 2 goody gumdrops ones. The ones I wrote my first book on, Evolution Slam Dunk, which is on the reptile-mammal transition. And then the ones that I've kind of eased into over the years, which are ALU retrotransposons. ALU stands for something that I can never remember what the hell it is. It's a really long thing, and that's why nobody in the science literature ever uses anything other than the acronym. But anyway, retrotransposons, I'll put them in first because that and the reptile-mammal transition are handy because they directly involve us. Retrotransposons are little RNA strings that are floating around, probably from a virus, and they're about maybe 300 nucleotides long. They're not terribly large, little blobs, and they happen to have the property about them that basically says, copy me, copy me, copy me. So once they're in the genome, copy me, copy me, copy me. It spreads and spreads and spreads. Back when I first encountered them in my research back in the 1990s, they had already identified something like 400,000 of them in the human genome. Now it's up to like 1.4 million, and they're gradually growing more and more and more because it's copy me, copy me, copy me. But it doesn't say read me. So it can get copied and copied and copied and inserted all over the place. And then the mechanism that generates proteins and stuff comes along and just removes them as it does any extraneous material because they've got systems that operate on that. However, all it needs is a single point mutation and it can suddenly say, read me. And most of the time, that's not a good idea because suddenly it's causing proteins to misfold and it's causing illnesses. The vast majority of ALU glitch-ups involve that. But in a rare instance involving a protein that ended up doing stuff in the brain, they turned out to be helpful. It improved the thing and it's gotten now selection pressure and there's a whole little subsection of ALUs that are functionally useful. It also, because this thing connects up, it turns out that ALU, if it sees another ALU like backwards, it'll plug themselves together like little Lego blocks and it causes things to bend around. Well, that's why we don't have tails.
Yeah.
because it turns out that somewhere in the hominid lineage, the ALUs that we had caused the DNA in a particular spot to loop around because the two ALUs were plugging together and shutting it off so it doesn't get read.
Right.
And that is the thing that leads to tails in primates normally, but because it isn't being read, it isn't happening. So all the tailless primates are because of this stupid ALU connection. The papers on this have only just been in the last couple of years. But there's a side effect. It's doing that with that gene all the way down the road. And some of the things are causing diseases and a propensity for diseases in our lineage because of that little mess up. Now, is that designed? If somebody like Casey Luskin has come along, retrotransposons are designed. All of the ALUs, many, most. So the designer is a sadist who likes to put little bad. It's like Napoleon in Time Bandits. I like to see little people hitting other little people. That doesn't sound very good. Now, my slam dunk then is the reptile mammal transition, because that's the stuff that we literally carry the evidence around right here in our jaws and our ears. And it is the delicious bit. Because if you look at the vertebrates that develop, the basic standard layout is very boring. It's the case in the first tetrapods that are evolving from fish, and it's staying the case for reptiles, and it's staying the case in the branch that goes off into dinosaurs and birds, and it's in the stuff that's in the extant reptiles. And that is that there's a dentary bone in the front that has the teeth, dentary, and then behind it are multiple bones, and then there's the one at the far end that's called the articular bone, and it articulates, with the quadrate bone up in the skull. And that's the standard vertebrate layout for everybody, and that's boring as shit, except mammals. We, unique of all the animals, don't have that layout. Instead, we have one ginormous dentary bone with that coronoid process that sticks up. Everybody that's seen a Halloween skeleton knows exactly what the bloody thing looks like. It's the easiest thing in the world when you go to a museum to spot a mammal, because they've got that ginormous single bone with the thing that sticks up at the far end. That's the standard shape. And that dentary bone articulates not with the quadrate bone, but with a completely different bone in the skull, the squamosal. Now, what happened to the other bones? It turns out that in the 1830s, long before Darwin, they were noticing a peculiar thing about mammal embryology when they started looking. All mammals start out with all of the reptile bones in the standard reptile layout. And then, as the dentary bone gets bigger and bigger and bigger, it eventually bumps into the squamosal bone on the skull, and those other little bones disconnect and they move up into the middle ear. They're the ones we hear with. This was known before Darwin. Now, all of this would therefore lay out a thing. How the hell did that happen? How could that happen in an evolutionary context where it has to be functional all the time? And you get some apologetics on this with Duane Gish in the 60s and 70s, and even down to his 1990s book, where how the bones, there's no explanation for this. It's a complete mystery, blah, blah, blah. Well, even he had stumbled into the source material on this subject, but he misrepresented it, And when you start researching the material, you find out what the actual facts are, which is why I love it so much. And I was pissed off that no one had put all this material together, especially how creationists were misrepresenting it. Because here's the skivvy. After Darwin died in the 1880s, by the 1890s, paleontologists, particularly down in South Africa, were finding these very odd, what they started calling mammal-like reptiles, because they had the standard reptile layout, all the bones in place, articular quadrate, except the dentary bone's really big. I mean, it's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's starting to have this little bump in the far end that's looking a lot like what happens in mammals.
Yeah.
And so they're thinking, maybe this is the group that mammals evolved from. It's got this strange thing. It's still got the standard reptile jaw, but it's looking very mammally. And everybody, every little kid with a dinosaur set has seen one of these critters. Dimetrodon, the finback reptile, that pops up in so many little kits of things. That's what's called the synapsid reptiles that have just a single skull opening, as opposed to the diapsids that have two skull openings that leads off to the reptiles and birds and all that crap. So how the hell can you get from an articular quadrate layout to a dentary squamosal and not require some like weird jump? How does that happen? You could imagine a designer designing suddenly rearrange it, but yet why go to the rigmarole of having the embryology starting out in the standard reptile mode?
Yeah.
What's going on there?
It's almost like
Robert Broom, who was a
Sorry, I was just going to say, it's almost like the embryology is like recapitulating the phylogeny there or something like that. Or gosh,
isn't it though? Isn't it though? Yeah.
I don't know if that's a saying.
Yes. For all the grief poor Heckle gets on this subject, sorry, it is kind of like that. Anyway, Robert Broom is way more famous for what he was in the 1920s because he was one of the guys digging up Australopithecines that helped cement the African origin for our species. But back in the 1890s, he was just an annoying paleontologist in South Africa. Kind of he didn't like Lamarckianism, he didn't like Darwinism per se, but he was an evolutionist and he wasn't sure. He's sort of like a little like Teilhard de Chardin. There's been a paper that gone into his philosophy of things. Anyway, he was a persnickety, meticulous guy. He wrote a paper in 1912 looking at these odd mammal-like reptiles. And, he goes, wow, there's only one way this is going to work from an evolutionary point of view. Let me underline that. There's only one way this is going to work. You're going to have a bunch where the skull is morphed around so the quadrate and the squamosal are right next to each other, and that the articular jaw hinge is joined by a new jaw hinge from a dentary bone that's right next to it as it's gotten so big, and that you would have a double jaw form that would be pulling in the same direction. And that eventually that becomes the dominant one, and the other bones can now loosen up and they can be then co-opted for hearing purposes. That's the only way I can think it could work from an evolutionary point of view. And so for the next 20 years, that was just a gauntlet thrown down on the paleontology table until 1932, when they discovered the first of the double-jawed reptile mammals, Probanignathus, which was named Brumii in his honor. And then they in the 50s, they discovered another one, Diarthognathus. And so since then, they found more and more of them, and they've found transitional ones where some of the articular bones are still loosely attached, and they've got just oodles of steps that have been found in all of this stuff that does it. So to my mind, it's the ultimate slam dunk in this area. And boy, has this not been a hot topic in the anti-evolution community. That they just bypass this. So even if they managed to bump in, I went into the Creation Wiki account, I went into the material that was in the intelligent design books where they were tiptoeing past this stuff and misrepresenting the material and not citing primary sources and playing around fast and loose in there. 100% failure rate when it comes to that. And, and ironically, if I ever do a illustrated and updated edition of Slam Dunk, there's this guy, I think his name is McLean, who's a young Earth creationist paleontologist, and he actually did a video criticizing my book a few years back. And I was interested to see what he does when he gets down to the Probanignathus. And he just skips right past us.
Of course.
Why am I not surprised?
Typical. You know what? I'm really glad we're getting deep into it. It sounds to me like it's almost like some kind of transitional form, or like these are like fossils that show a transition. You could maybe call them like
as I put it in the book,
or something like that.
If God didn't want me to believe in evolution, he shouldn't have created therapsids and synapsids.
Right. Yeah.
Because it's just a dumb mistake to do. Why would that data field be what it is unless there were evolution, especially since you've got pesky little broom, literally predicting it 20 years in advance. There was no such animal that existed. Ironically, another critter, I could find one example over in the bird side where there's a species of parrot that is starting to develop a secondary jaw joint with its dentary bone in the thing. So this is a developmental thing that can occur. See, the whole point about how evolution works is that there's automated programs that do their shtick, and they can start going into new directions because they're not intelligently designed. They just do their thing. And so when you have a bone or cartilage in the embryo and there's muscle attachments that can form in there, you can kick in things where fresh muscle attachments can form and new things can be, and things can be disconnected just by the alteration of some regulatory thing. Most of the time, that's going to be a mess. And the critter goes and leaves no descendants and therefore edits out the issue. But once in a while, occasionally, something actually is beneficial and then spreads through the population over time, and that alters the dynamic of things. And if it's a mutation that can occur fairly easily or in multiple different ways, that's where you get convergence in biology of similar forms. The reason why the PAX gene shows up in every eyeball system on the planet, even ones that are totally in the eyes have developed multiple times, but the genetic systems are involved in that. One of the things we touched on in Roxford there, and I also alluded to it in Slam Dunk, is the underlying system of hair and feathers. It runs from the same system. That their sonic hedgehog and bone morphological protein, the genetic systems that generate hair and feathers, are virtually the same in birds and mammals, but they manifest themselves very differently, in part due to a weird little accident way back before any one of them would look anything at all like either a bird or a mammal, because sometimes the skin will want to dimple out versus sometimes the little skin will want to dimple in. And that difference channels those genetic systems, which is why feathers and hair look so different, even though at the placode level, and there's been a ton of literature that's been done on this over the years, which, by the way, is ignored virtually completely by the anti-evolution community. Duh.
Yeah. You know what's interesting to me too is as we're talking about the dentary bone kind of gradually changing and all these different changes that are occurring, is I know I've heard creationists say things like, "Oh, you never see a partially formed organism. They all just pop into existence in the fossil record, fully formed."
The fully formed trope.
Yeah.
And the problem is, evolution requires that everything be fully formed. All stages of it. That's the whole bit about these double jointed reptiles, is that they would still be fully formed. They're functional. That's the whole point. You don't have these saltational jumps where you snip from one to another, whereas a designer theoretically can do that. Another little tool that comes in from the far end of stuff is claydism, which is an analytical take. Aren't feathers, hair also related to scale? Well, yeah, at the deep placode level. That there's Alabardi and a few other people, and get my books, you'll find the references on all that stuff. Shameless plug. Anyway, at the skin placode level, well before you get to the physical scale, one of the things that threw off some of the creationists when they were wandering around in this area is that the idea that the scale that everyone thinks of if they're looking at a snake surface or an alligator is the thing that's being modified. Those are already highly modified epidermal forms. It's way down at the developmental process at the placode level that produces the substructures for all those different things. That's where the deep evolution is taking. And you read those papers, they're going into experimental bits, and they can trigger off material. You've been able to trigger off, that's another thing, paleogenomics. Yes, holy smokes, we allude to that to some extent in the books as well. This is where we moved evolution, and there's virtually zero coverage of this anywhere in the anti-evolution literature. And you can about to find out why. Because they've reached the stage where they can now retro-engineer evolutionary processes and test them out experimentally. So, for example, if you're wondering at two proteins that are in fairly distantly related organisms, you can then retrocalculate what the ancestral form needed to have looked like that would be able to produce the A and the B along evolutionary lineages, and test out that ancestral form to see what its functionality was. And there's been a bunch of papers on that kind of stuff. There's material that's been tracking down how the snout of a dinosaur is turning into the bird's beak, and what genes are involved in that, and what regulatory systems are shut off experimentally. And so this is only stuff that's going to get more.
Are we talking about like computer simulations, or is this?
No, this is factual. This is actual experimental stuff, where they generated the bird beak form or rather taking the bird beak genes and shutting down some connectors, and it forms a standard reptile snout.
That's fascinating.
Experimentally. Oh yeah, yeah. And this stuff is not staggeringly recent. Some of these papers go back a decade, but it virtually gets ignored, or if they do bring it up, I think Elizabeth Mitchell over at AIG kind of bounced off of some of this stuff. And some of the stuff, again, we allude to it in the books and all that, that they tiptoe around stuff a little bit here, and then they try to produce rationalizations as to why it isn't a problem. Meanwhile, the stuff continues. So paleogenomics at all levels are continuing. Now, if you look at somebody like Douglas Axe and Ann Gager trying to diffuse this on the intelligent design side, they try to disprove this by cheating. So remember, I pointed out that you've got like a molecule A, a molecule B, and you retrocalculate up to where the ancestral form would be and see then how that would work out to produce the diverging lineage. When they try to disprove it, they take the A and the B and try to get directly from one to the other. They don't bother about working out what the ancestral form would be. And those are two separate issues. So the tiny amount of work that they've done on that subject, and again, the years are going by more and more and more, they're not dealing with it. An important thing to remember when you're looking into anti-evolution apologetics is to check the date of the claim and find out what happened since. So you get these things. I just stumbled on some of this stuff in doing the cosmology chapter, where a creationist is saying, some creationists should really look into doing a proper analysis of this particular issue in relation to galaxy formation, which is a tacit admission that none of them had done that. And in the 5 or 6 years since then, nobody's done that. Or when we would bring up particular topics, and there are a lot of things that anti-evolutionists are never going to be able to pull off. Yeah. So the intelligent designers don't get close enough to the data field even to be useless. It's like that old physics jibe, says the theory is not even wrong. I think Pauly or somebody said about one stupid science theory. Yeah, they're not even wrong. But the young Earth creationists have testable models in principle at a far greater level. Created heterozygosity is their biggie, because they require, not just for human beings, remember, everything was created only 6,000 years ago. So theoretically, the critters on the ark that are preserved and us all have the remnants of these alleged created kinds. How can you pull that off? How can you get the allele frequencies? How can you get the disposition of retrotransposons? Dan Stern-Cardinale has done tons of stuff pointing out that whenever you have a genetic element where there's no selection pressure, it can kind of drift and float around. There should be no reason for why that would form nested hierarchies. And in fact, he had a thing. Oh God, was he talking to Sarfati? I think he was talking to Jonathan or Jerry Bergman, one of the two, on a debate, and he put up a chart of a bunch of critters, 4 examples of actual genetic data, but he left off all the labeling. And 2 of them are from things that creationists accept are the same kind. And 2 of them are from things that creationists say aren't the same kind. And he wanted to know if Bergman could tell just from the structure of the data field which ones were which. And he gave a stab at it. And he did 50-50. He got half of them right and half of them wrong, which means he could not identify a created form versus an evolved form because some of that I think were from mice and some of the other examples on that. And I made sure that I got all the technical papers that were involved so that I would have that in my data field as well. So we can test at the data floor level. That's why when the last thing that a creationist wants to do is to bump into somebody that knows their shit.
Yeah.
So
right.
Danstern Cardinale is a professor in it. Zach Hancock is somebody on paleoanthropology. Gutsick Gibbon is like a buzzsaw if you try to get in with her on stuff, and she can rattle off the material. Jackson Wheat, who's a biology guy, he can rattle off taxa and systematics information that I just boggle at that he can remember all of this stuff. Holy shit, I have to write this crap down and keep track of it in that respect. But that's why creationists are so fond of debating somebody outside of their area of expertise. So somebody who may be a geologist and they want to talk about evolutionary data, well, that's not their area. Or they want to talk to an evolutionary biologist and bring up cosmology. That's not their area. And so the idiot that is polymathically wrong, like a Kent Hovind, will have a whole bunch of little apologetic squibs to deal with. But they will not typically be bumping into somebody that has actual expertise in that area because there won't be much left of them on the floor.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got two interesting things in the chat that I want to show to you here,
good.
James.
Great.
This person, LA Drone, is saying, hello, everyone. I'm a person who doesn't speak English well, and I'd love to be able to understand what you're saying. I'm so enthusiastic about evolution that I've started a new evolutionary theory. And then they go on to say, I'm going to briefly summarize. I could go on for miles and miles what my novel evolutionary theory consists of. Besides speculating about the past, I also do so about the future. Well, LA Drone, we're all waiting with bated breath. Please, I'm fascinated to hear what your theory is. If you are as passionate as you say you are about evolution, you might know that there's actually a couple different evolutionary theories. There's your Darwinism, your neo-Darwinism, your modern synthesis.
I'll quote what Danstern Cardinale has said to creationists on this very point. You don't need to persuade me. You need to write up your paper and submit it to a journal and put it through peer review and persuade that crowd. Just like when I debated Kent Hovind, I wasn't expecting anybody in the audience to suddenly jump up and go, oh my gosh, Kent Hovind is wrong, although once in a while that can happen. I mean, virtually everybody that's debated these things, there will be occasional people in there that kind of go, wow, yeah. That suddenly there's somebody in the audience going, that's actually kind of a good point against that guy, and start researching precisely. But I tell them, none of this matters on YouTube. Science isn't decided by YouTube. None of this stuff changes the data field. If you want to talk yourself into thinking you have some grand new evolutionary theory, fine and dandy, but I don't care. I'm not important. I'm just a little YouTuber person in here, but I do pay attention to the material. And I can guarantee you, if you can't make a solid argument that can persuade somebody, then maybe you should reconsider that you have an argument at all. And so everybody, the place is littered with stuff. And what is tended to be the case on that is that the grand theory of things tends to be the most hilariously inept material. I don't know if you've heard of Barry Setterfield. He's the variable speed of light guy. I had a thing of his that back in the day, I would often print up the whole copy of the thing. And so I would have these monster masses of paper, like 100 pages long. He has this grand plasma theory that he comes up with. It's persuaded nobody, even in the regular creationist community, that it's correct. But what turned out to be hilarious is he has this grand scheme where he has a whole chronology of things. And so he's got a date for the flood that doesn't match anybody else in the creationist community. He's got everything just off. He's putting stuff where he's trying to calibrate literally the geologic column. So he has stuff going on where Babel is taking place during the Cambrian. I mean, it's just misplaced concreteness up the yin yang that it's absolutely hilarious. And it's on a chart I've got that we're going to be having in the new book that I think will be one of the little golden moments that you wouldn't notice this if you only read apologetics, because the question you ask is, when did the flood take place? And if you're an AIG ICR person, you're going to go 2348 or thereabouts, 2350, something like that. That's the Bishop Usher date. I even didn't realize how many different dates there were for the flood by creationists, all using the same source and method. It sprawls across thousands of years. It's just hilariously ranging. In some cases, one little creationist, this Rob Brown guy, flipped his brain and moved the flood thousands of years in between one of his papers and the next one. Same data field, So this means that you can help clarify. Another date that's a handy one to remember if you don't want to worry about the flood thing, ask them when the Exodus took place. This is an absolute diagnostic. They're going to, if they are traditionalist creationists, they're going to say 1450, 1500. If they are the modern scholarly crowds and more likely to be an intelligent designer, they're going to have to say 1150, 1200-ish, And that is really diagnostic. That's an instant demark. Even Setterfield ended up at 1500 BC for his Exodus date. So as a historian, and I think chronologically, I love to pin down these little bliplets to try to put stuff out. Dates even come up relevant to trying to peg what data field people are dealing with in terms of familiarity of stuff. Any work they're citing on biological material that predates DNA, why are you going open the thing? I mean, it can be useful on some little sidebar technical issue, but shouldn't you be like in the post-DNA period? Another one, so you've got DNA being discovered in the 1950s, but they didn't work out the nucleotide sequencing system until the 1960s. And it wasn't until the 1990s that they were really going whole hog on homeobox genes, which are the systems. It was a ginormous gear shift in evolutionary thinking to realize that it wasn't one protein per gene, and that you've got all of this air quotes junk DNA things on there, but that they were expecting things like arthropods, a cricket, and a zebra to have radically different genetic structures at their basement level. And it turns out, no, they're all using homeobox genes. And there's been mutations and shifted in the arthropod lineage versus the vertebrate lineage, down to the point where they have all of our own individual toolkits. And so there's been this just absolute transformation on this. 1960s, 70s, 80s on for plate tectonics. The cosmology thing also is hitting into anything pre-Hubble. Be careful about, because we have such a big data set now. And so those little benchmarks that everyone can have in their heads as to navigating through a field where quoting some stuff on material from 1985 on cosmology. Wow. Yes. Let's talk about fax machines and VHS. I mean, let's move on, kids.
So homeobox genes, those are like super conserved genes that dictate body plans. There's an even more specific kind within those called the Hox genes, and those are extremely conserved. What's so fascinating is not only that, they're homologous across such a wide variety of species, they're still functional. Like, I bet you probably know this, but if you didn't, this should blow your mind. If you take,
you can insert one from widely divergent ones and they'll still work.
Yeah. If you take a Hox gene,
it's just common design. It's just common design, Austin. It's not anything like that. Then how do you account for the little mutations, the typographical errors in there? That's where those the introns and extrons and the ALUs that we get into. It's just like this absolutely fascinating stuff. So the major problem with all anti-evolutionists is that they never really think through a model. This has been a long time coming. That that all of their argument is an anti-argument. We don't like naturalism. We don't like Darwin. We don't like the air quotes atheists that are supposedly in the thing. Never mind the number of religious evolutionists there are, and blah blah blah, and that the Big Bang was developed by a Belgian Catholic astronomer. It's just anti. Ask. Do you move on to the point of actually working things out? How do you feel when creationists claim evolution is a religion and who is your evolution? Oh, I go harumph, harumph. No, that one's and for one thing, it's a backhanded absurdity, because are they saying like religion is bad? that
Yeah.
you shouldn't have religions, but the main thing is it's trying to put it onto the both sidisms things. It's just a matter of another. It falls into the same category as, and Casey Luskin will use this and others, is that we deal with the same data as you do. We just have a different interpretation because we are not blinded by your materialist assumptions.
Yeah.
At which I, smug bastard that I am, say, no, we don't deal with the same data because I effing measure it at source level. I showed you when we had our little pre-chat in that last week or so, that spreadsheet that I had on my screen of my data field, and that
You showed
part of my little tip.
You showed very conclusively that creationists are not dealing with the same data. They're dealing with a very tiny sliver of the entire data set, which is
not
massive.
Guessing, measuring. Yeah, nobody had done this before, and it's another reason why everybody should be my Patreon to help finance, so I can keep going on this kinds of things, because it's a matter that nobody had thought to do. It's one thing to just look into the source field and all that, and then I had my epiphany. Oh yeah, it's been over a decade ago, when I thought, wait a minute, all I need to do is just kind of keep track of every technical paper that they cite, even the ones that are non-controversial and kind of peripheral. I'm now measuring their penetration into the source data field. And then I have a number that I can measure it against because I have researched the issues beyond that to make sense out of all of that. So they've got their little set of data field, and then I've got my bigger set of data field. And by bigger, there's been maybe 6, 7, 8,000 technical papers that have been cited across the entire anti-evolution biz that I have in my reference field. That compares to the, hold your horses, 36,000 papers that I have in my full data seal that includes their bunch. So they're functionally hitting about 20% of my data field. But mine is not the whole data field. I don't claim to have the complete skivvy, but it's certainly a representatively good sampling. And then when I measure at a specific level, my weekly evolution hours, I go through books that don't have a proper reference bibliography, that make it hard to deal with. So a couple of Nathaniel Jensen's books I've gone through. I went through Rupin Sanford's Contested Bones, and I'm currently going through, matter of fact, I'll show that. The stupid little Titans. There we go. Dinosaur book by creationist Sarfati and Tay. And it doesn't have a reference bibliography in the back end. If they've got footnotes at the ends of chapters, it's organized an awful lot like Pandas and People that have a footnote at the end of chapter, no bibliography at the end, which means you can't easily find out, did they cite X or not? You don't know because they don't have a reference bibliography. So I assemble my reference bibliography.
My bar for creationists is so incredibly, abysmally low. It's subterranean. And yet somehow they still don't get over that bar. That's how can you write something purporting to be scientific without having a bibliography?
Steve Meyer and Michael Denton will at least have a reference bibliography. And so you can kind of find out what's in there. By the way, a typical Steve Meyer book like Darwin's Doubt has about 800 sources, something like that. I did a rough guesstimate just to find out. My books have thousands of sources, and so they're still playing on a kind of a rudimentary level. But anyway, when I look through each one as I go through the references that they are citing, if they're technical literature, I'm finding out, are they fairly representing the source or not? And a chunk of them are fine. They're making an assertion, they're citing the source, it doesn't contradict the source. Okay, it doesn't matter whether the source is accurate or not, but it's a thing that they're not misrepresenting it.
Right,
but
if they are, this person is right, it's just saying this person has this opinion.
If they are not mentioning relevant information that ought to have been mentioned, that was in the source, that's a different kettle of fish. That's big problem number one. And big problem number two, keep that little thing from Sydney up so I can read it after I'll stop blathering. Issue number two then is where they represent the source, that they are actually putting it or putting a material where they're using it for content that actually is contradicted. Both of those things will get it into the category of misrepresentation. It's been fairly consistent from Rupin Sanford through the Thu Jensen books to what we have so far with the Sarfati thing. They're misrepresenting half of their technical literature.
Yeah.
Half.
I have a hypothesis.
That's not good.
Yeah, no, that's insane. It's like,
okay, twice in the last month with Creationist, I've been pointed to the 75 paper by King and Wilson, Evolution at 2 Levels in Humans and Chimpanzees. Not even sure why they think it supports creationists. Ooh, let me find out, since my bibliography is open.
I have a theory. I have a hypothesis, Sydney. I'm guessing they don't know either, but some other creationist told them it does for X reason. And if you look into the paper, it doesn't actually say that, probably, is what I would guess. That has been my experience.
Here I will be demonstrating my own little bit here. Okay, I got a ton of papers with somebody named King, and I'm looking down here to be King and Wilson, right? I'm singing in the rain, just singing in the rain.
While you're singing in the rain and doing that, I want to address this comment by LA Drone. It might surprise you to know, Drone, that artificial selection, that's just another kind of natural selection.
Yeah. Oh, now
I almost hate that term because it gives people the impression that these are different forms of selection. An organism being changed because it's being acted on by another organism, its relationship to it, that's super common. This is very anthropocentric thinking. It's thinking, that somehow when a human is involved in the process that makes it different. It really doesn't. It's still just natural selection, in my opinion.
Okay, let me earn my pay. All we knew was that an anti-evolutionist mentioned this King and Wilson thing. It's in my reference bibliography. Mary Claire King and A.C. Wilson, 1975, Evolution at 2 Levels in Humans and Chimpanzees. Science, volume 188, 11 April. 1975. Holy shit, that's antiquated. Why would anybody think that's relevant from that point on? But I go over to my spreadsheet, King and Wilson, 1975, and it's got a black box next to it. It has been cited by anti-evolutionists. It's part of their apologetic frame. So he is copying it from somebody else. And it was cited as recently as May of 2018 that I have in a doc file reference so that I can locate the material on it. And so that level of parasitism, I love it. When I bring up the reptile mammal transition, for example, with people online, and I'm just hoping they go Google, and they're going to Google evidence against the reptile mammal transition, and they're going to find out exactly what they would find out if they do a quick Google. They're going to find John Woodmarap's 2001 paper in the Journal of Creation, and I've had several of them lob that at me. Aha! Take that! Yeah, I devoted an entire chapter to the book explaining why that paper was absolute claptrap. Would you like to discuss the details? And for some reason, they kind of run off at that point.
Yeah, if there's one thing that I think is very reliable about creationists is that they're very predictable. Yeah, they say very predictable things. They say a lot of them. So that is kind of how they get around being predictable, is by just having a sheer volume of claims to make. Like, I think we talked about this when we had our conversation before the stream about how Talk Origins has an index of creationist claims that's extremely comprehensive.
Nothing new under the sun.
Yeah.
And eventually you get the one neat thing about creationism as a scholarly study is it has a long track record.
It does.
If you're looking at comparable groups that are methodologically indistinguishable, the 9/11 conspiracy theorists, well, the towers were only blown up in this century, so it's an extremely small, recent group. We only landed on the moon in 1969, and so there's you'd only be we didn't land on the moon crowd after the Apollo missions, right?
Yeah.
Whereas Darwin comes along in 1859, and so you have got generations of people who have been shooting their mouth off on this subject on such a way that you can look at them and see what changes and what doesn't, what doctrines alter and what doesn't, how they evolve over time. There's a big kerfuffle, for example, in the several kerfuffles that circulate around Institute for Creation Research. They're the oddballs in the modern creation, that they're one of the older groups. So the new kids, AIG, Answers in Genesis, and it had its little split divorce that turned into CMI, the Creation Ministries International, because they were having squabbles with arrogant prick Ken Ham over how they were dealing with finances and that. So that from 2006 on, that's where CMI and AIG part company. But ICR now is kind of like the old crusty old fossils on the block group. And the Morrises have dropped dead, and now they've got Randy Guglielmo, who is going the thing, and Joel Duff. So that paper was 30 years before the chimpanzee genome was sequenced exactly. They basically examined the microbiology of proteins. Yeah, somebody looking in the 1970s, early in the generation of things, it's absolutely irrelevant. It's like trying to argue about phlogiston. Excuse me, we moved on. Let's try to get something that's younger than a VCR to deal with. Anyway, I suddenly have dislodged my train of thought that was going on there. Sorry about that. Even I can become confused at times. But so this methods issue of, the whole generational thing on stuff in Guglielmo. ICR has got two positions that if you come into ICR, you're going to find a viewpoint that is at odds with other creationists. One is Guglielmo hates natural selection. And so he has decided it's not a thing. Most other creationists will be okay with natural selection as a reality within a kind. Guglielmo comes up with this stupid continuous environmental tracking crap, that various people, Dan Stern Cardinale and Zach Hancock and Dapper Dino and these various others have done some hilarious breakdowns, and we're going to have a little info box material on it in the new book and that, because it became such a cause célèbre that I think Jason Lyle left the ICR because of it. And he's an astrophysicist in that, but this was this is pseudoscience. You don't like natural selection? It's a real thing. The other one is, when did the flood end? That's the other bit. And the normal creationist position is that it's occurring at the Cretaceous with the dinosaur extinction. That's almost all creationists are following that party line, except for Tim Clary and company at ICR, where they are just obsessed with moving it down into the Cenozoic, maybe all the way to the Pleistocene period. And I can see the logic, in air quotes, for it, because how do you look at the difference between fossils in the Green River that are like Miocene, that look just as fossily as the stuff from the Cretaceous, if the Cretaceous stuff formed in the flood isn't the Green River stuff, all of this post-18, isn't that a flood too? So there's a certain wacky logic to it, but holy smokes, if you progress this far, you're starting to bump into more data fields in the same way that you've got this whole bit, and Dan Stern Cardinale and Zach Hancock and stuff have done hilarious material on Robert Carter and all of the circumlocutions they do about this created heterozygosity genome thing in relation to the flood. Basically it's Nathaniel Jensen and to some extent Sanford and others who are just trying to accept the genetic data, which they themselves did not prepare. They're just trawling through the science literature and then just compressing it all so that the oldest material is Noah, and then everything since then is there. And now kind of like a sliding curve where they have this abrupt drop as they move into the current problem. But even with that, you get into these just unbelievably preposterous things. There was one, I think, I can't remember whether it was like R1 or R2, one of the haplotypes that occurs in the human genome. And it, according to Jensen's convivial argument, is developing during the Middle Ages, post-Christian Middle Ages. Well, they've got actual DNA from old Neolithic sites that date back like 20,000 years. That's got our haplotype in their genome. We've got the data field on here. Does he not know about this? And the short answer is no, he doesn't, because he's too far away from the data field.
Oof. That's bad.
Ouch, burn.
That's
that's bad. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And when you start looking at the arguments in there, that Dan Stern Cardinale and Zach Hancock, who are oh God, follow Zach Hancock's stuff as well. My Lord, this guy is superb. His videos,
to both.
He explains things and does it with historical background. So the technical issues about the role of purifying selection and all of these little in the weeds material, and he's telling you the perspective of how this came about and the seminal papers on this subject and how it's worked out over time. It's just a gold mine of material, because he teaches this at the level and writes technical papers and all this kind of stuff. So they know this stuff inside out from their own level, not outsider little twerp like RJ here, who's looking at it from just for the scholarly methods. No, this is their field. And so they dive into this material with just a vengeance, and the goalpost moving and the circumlocutions that are going on in this area. Even Carter has criticized some of Sanford's material. Genetic entropy, that's one that pops up, and you can always measure a dumb creationist who tries to wave genetic entropy at you. Sorry, it's not a thing. Right. And there is huge criticism of it in the creationist community by Carter and others, where they're saying, you know, there's a lot of problems with this material. You won't find that at the surface level. That's another.
It's literally a problem that fixes itself too. If you have or if you have a genome that's approaching the level of error catastrophe, odds are you're not going to find a mate. You might not even.
How could anything be alive? In fact, there's been bacterial material that's been tested that if this thing were true, it would have gone extinct. That the kinds of experiments in that have been done, and he points out with a considerable snark that, my God, this stuff has been resolved like 1940s. There was this paper by Delbruck or whatever, you know, that basically resolved this issue. And, you know, why are you another one, you know, Haldane's dilemma. We've discussed that in Rocks Were There Volume 1. You still find some creationists that throw it out, stupid little standing for truth, and all that crowd will continue to play this thing up. But no, sorry, when you look at the details, no, this is not a thing. It's we've moved on. There's a reason why we've got to understand what's going on. Try to get you up at least to the 21st century, because, you know, we've got paleogenomics now, kids. But the thing about that level of analysis, these squeaky wheel issues are occurring deep down in the in-house apologetics, the Journal for Creation, the Answers Research Journal, Creation Research Society Quarterly, all of that level, which I guarantee you is not hot reading for the average internet creationist. They're I've read more creationist literature than the average creationist does.
Same.
But when you go up to the surface level, the Ken Ham apologetics, the little videos that they do, they never allude to this unless they absolutely are into it. So when you look for a particular squeaky wheel issues like the heat problem, that Erica had done a just hilarious video compiling all the background material on this.
What I love about the heat problem is that even if you solve the heat aspect of it, there's still like 40 other development problems you have to solve. You have to solve the radioactivity aspect of it. You have to solve
the asteroid impact. Even one of the delicious ones.
Atmospheric.
And in fact, one of the most recent bits, and I'll give props to the Creation Research Society Quarterly. They actually published this paper recently. I haven't seen a response to it yet. There may not be one, frankly, but from an actual sedimentologist who, whether or not he's a Christian or not is irrelevant, but he's not a young Earth creationist. And they published his criticism because he points out it's his field that to turn sandstone or limestone into limestone, it generates heat and it has to dry out.
Yeah.
And there is no way that you can get this stuff dry enough in under 10,000 years.
Yep.
Just that aspect alone, let alone the lithification issues and all that.
Yes. There's the aspect that it needs calm water to occur in, which you wouldn't
another
have
one that I love. In fact, we allude to it in a word that doesn't pop up much, even in the standard literature, but it's there, is Plattenkalk. It's a funny, one of those little German. So many of the little words in the geology things, are from the German. It's like Lagerstätten and all that with little umlauts on them and all that. They're handy terms you want to recognize. Plattenkalk is a really obscure one because the Solnhofen deposit where the Archaeopteryxes are found in Germany is a Plattenkalk. They're ones that have beautiful preservation, and it's because they are super still waters. They are unbelievably calm waters. It is impossible to form a Plattenkalk in a turbulent, cataclysmic flood.
Yeah.
And so there's another one that I love to pay attention to in reading any geology paper is airborne volcanic ash. What did they turn the flood spigot on and off? How do you get airborne volcanic ash in a flood deposit? How is that possible? And so even papers that are not generically about anything that would be directly related to a creationism issue, you would think, but when you look at the stratigraphy charts in there, I'm always taking a look to see if I can find, airborne ash and tuff and all this kind of stuff, that indicates signs that, this ain't glub glub underwater. That we got a little problem on that. I live in the Pacific Northwest, and although it's not a great spot for paleontology, we're not the golden horde on that. We are mother lode central for geology because we've got volcanoes, we've got flood deposits, we've got basalt flood deposits, and we've got glacial outburst floods, the Missoula floods, multiple. So it is just geology central and exotic terrains, spelled Terrane. They're little blobs of real estate that get chumped in as plates are moving across. That's another area, just as paleogenomics has revolutionized the field in working out evolutionary biology. So too, they're applying 3D imaging processing to seismic data to where they can see at a level of resolution what's going on with prior plate movements. It turns out when a plate subducts, it kind of squiggles up at the edges like Christmas candy, those little spirally Christmas candies that are so hard that you can see. They form little wiggly things, look like a bunch of little S-curves. That's exactly what it looks like. And it kind of stays like a clump. Well, there's one deep, thousands of kilometers deep below New York City, along the east coast of the United States. It's the edge of what 300 million years ago was the leading edge of a subducting plate at what was the westward moving North American continent. So now they're able to work out previous plate movements and things that where plates may have totally disappeared, but their remnants will be stuck down deep in the earth, and you can retro calculate to work out what was going on the surface. Wow. Guess how much of that gets discussed in the creationist literature, like Tim Clary moving the flood.
Oh man!
So knowing what they leave out, you're going, why would anyone pay attention to you? You're not only not explaining the data, you're effing boring.
Right. Oh my gosh, that's so true. I especially like people like Kent Hovind who repeat themselves over and over and over again. Zero variety, zero new information. It's like I don't like watching live debates of his because I can't fast forward through.
Oh, he's insufferable. And I know he's a super fit. One of the things that I mentioned in my debate that it was by the Lord hath delivered him unto my hands moment, because literally like a month or so before he had done, I didn't pay close attention to Hovind because he is incredibly boring, but I decided just on a happenstance to catch a thing because a topic looked kind of interesting to see how he would be taking up the material or not, and it happened to be one on bird evolution. So I decided to dive in to see how much of it was old material, because I know creationists will wave like brushes paper from 1996, blah, blah, blah. You know, it's stuff I keep track of what they allude to and what they don't. And it turned out that for a huge swath, anyone who's familiar with Alan Fiducia, he's kind of like the Fred Hoyle of bird evolution. He's an evolutionist, but he doesn't like the bird dinosaur model, and he's come increasingly kind of a laughing stock in the field because everyone's going, sorry, Alan, this is not working.
Right. Yeah.
That you don't have a model of. But anyway, he's the go-to for all anti-evolutionists. Intelligent design proponents and young Earth creationists latch onto him like a limpet, and they repeat his arguments. So I was curious to see what he was dealing with, and as I was looking at the PowerPoints popping up from Hovind, it suddenly dawns on me he's not quoting Fiducia directly. He's copying somebody talking about Fiducia. So,
Oh, wow.
sneaky Pete, I type in the texts and do a text search to find out where they're coming from. And it turns out his entire PowerPoint, word for word, every single frame, was cribbed from Harun Yahya, the Islamic creationist, a thing
Yeah.
from 2002. He had copied the whole bloody thing, lock, stock, and barrel, including words he didn't understand. Here's a guy who directly types all this crap into his PowerPoint, and it never dawns on him to look up a word he doesn't understand or learn how to pronounce somebody's name. So he encounters lacustrine, which means like involving lakes.
Yeah.
And he said, well, I don't know what that is. Like, of course you don't know what it is. You would have to have studied anything that you put in. All you're doing is prattling on text secondarily, superficially. And so I brought that up in my debate because I was accusing him of being a secondary source addict, that he was superficial and he doesn't pay attention to any of the material. And I derailed him from his usual pattern, because anybody that's debated with Hovind knows he has a routine and he always ends up asking people to come to Jesus. He's got this is a rote routine, everything. He never got that far with me. And so he was totally thrown off, and he was accusing me of being the altar boy of atheism, even though I had not brought up God or anything. I was talking about scholarship issues, not religion.
Yeah.
And so he just kind of went ballistic, and he has not asked to debate with me in the 7 years since. I wonder why.
Of course. So, James, I think we're gonna start winding down here, getting near the end of this, and we've covered so very much. But one of the things I like to do when I do this stream is I like to do a little too long didn't watch at the end of it, because I know not.
Oh yeah,
everybody
some people
has
are going to come in midway and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, not everybody has time to sit through a 2.5 hour discussion about a subject that's
Between
already
talking
pretty
heads.
much. Yeah, it's already a settled matter in science. Like if they did their 8th grade biology class, they know why evolution is useful and why people learn about it and why they're using it and continuing to build on it. So I will do my best to say what I think the 2 or 3 points people should take away from this, and then I'll hand it off to you to cover anything I missed. And so let's see here. The 3 main points that I think people should take away from our discussion is, 1, the source methods thing. Like, you need to dive into primary scientific sources. If you aren't reading primary scientific sources, you're not getting good information. And reading primary scientific sources can be challenging. Like a 4-page scientific paper, that's a big read. That's going to take a couple of hours minimum just to read the paper and to really understand it. And it could take days or weeks to dig into all the references and works cited.
Yeah.
Another point is the whole aspect of if you're talking to a creationist, you should already have some level of suspicion. There is likely severe issues with their ethos that go beyond just whatever they're saying. Like, I tend to think about it like this. Creationists, it's inherent, it's implicit in their position that they have a dogmatic, presupposed conclusion that they can
They
never
got baggage.
discard. No, exactly. No matter how much evidence contradicts it, nor how well they are shown the evidence contradicts it, they are going to stick to that presupposed conclusion.
Bounces off the mine shell.
Yes. And then the last thing I want to talk about, I think that we're kind of pretty much, I feel like the core of the source methods and the presupposed conclusion is ethos. The idea, one of the 3 portions or 4 portions of I think it's Socrates' rhetoric. You had your pathos, your logos, your ethos, and your kairos. Pathos being emotion, logos being logic, kairos being you have to get people at the right time, but ethos is the credibility of the person speaking. And a secondary source addict is somebody who has 0 ethos. You should not consider them a credible expert on any issue, let alone as one as complicated as evolutionary science. So if you take no other points away from this video, maybe just get that last one there or the other 2 and get all 3 of those points. But I think that it boils it down to something that is digestible to the severely lacking in attention, kind of average layman that is out there. If we can't make something as interesting as whatever beef is going on between Kendrick Lamar and Drake, they kind of tune out. So I think 1 to 3 points is a useful way.
There are two elements to deal with. Is whenever you're encountering somebody that has baggage, that you want to find out where they are on the landscape. So that's why a lot of anti-evolution issues that can come up, if it's a different issue, if you're talking to a young Earth creationist versus an intelligent design advocate. So pinning down, I have a general issue about the map of time in your head. You want to get chronology in place. You want to get the dates in place. And so that put that benchmark in place, just asking a question on there. It says, so are we on the same page? I think like the Earth is like 4.5 billion years old, and that trilobites came along like 500 million years ago. Do you agree or disagree? That helps to clarify a thing, because an awful lot of folks will be coming at it from a perspective where they may not know anything at all about that kind of a field. And only if you progress to that, they're using their tropes that they've carried in without necessarily understanding the context. On the technical paper issue, don't be terrified of them. Be wary in the sense that it can be complicated to deal with, and you're going to be bumping into jargon and details, and you can get into a lot of weeds. But the structure of things are fairly straightforward. The abstract of a paper in a science paper is a rigorous summary of the issues. You go down to the end of the paper before the footnotes part, and there will be a discussion section. That's where they're summarizing their main points. And so that you can skip initially past the methods department and all of that, where there's an awful lot of eye-glazing detail that the technical people will be paying attention to. But typically, the end discussion thing is written in a fairly straightforward prose, and you can find out what the point of the paper is. When you deal with different disciplines, they have different structures. For years, I never realized why lawyer papers were so boring. And that's because lawyers have a set routine the way they do stuff. When I saw the old anti-evolution book that was written by, oh God, I've forgotten his name now. But anyway, he wrote it in like 2 volumes. And I was just gobsmacked at how preposterously repetitive it was, because he would write down what his argument was as a preface. And then he would discuss the argument, which was basically the same thing over and over again. And then there was a concluding section that was repeating the stuff that he'd already given. And so you had like this multiple dipping of the same points. That's how lawyers construct briefs.
Yeah.
I discovered when my very first debate was debating this pompous lawyer that I was invited over because for some reason they couldn't find anybody in Seattle. And so I came over from Spokane to discuss the Grease v. Galloway prayer case. Anyway, I kind of cleaned his clocks because I don't think he was expecting somebody to have researched and read all of his papers on the subject and all that. But that's when I discovered that lawyers operate in this boring format. They don't have an abstract format that you find in even historical analyses, and definitely not in the scientific field, where they have a particular structure. So you get past the kind of surface layer of the structure of it. Ultimately, you're talking about what evidence are they presenting and how does that fit into stuff. So when you read a technical science paper, you go down to things. If you don't understand it because there's a certain level of jargon, that's one thing. In other areas, you can move on and find out what the main conclusions are, and you go, oh, wait a minute, they cited Schmidlap and Schmogelploop and Flampnubel down at the end. Look up those papers. Oh, okay, now can I find those papers? And you can find out more about it, so you can kind of start burrowing in on the material. The other thing I would suggest is don't dive in to a specific topic with a creationist if you're not well informed. You need to know what that creationist's opinions are, what their writings are. Don't come into it cold. Don't think you can just have a universal one kit approach. I think that's catastrophe. And you want to deal with a topic that you are familiar with, and that way you can tell when they're trying to bullshit you.
Yeah.
So there's the logic of it thing. It's requires care and fun, but if you're focusing on things that you are interested in anyway, then it's going to be a lot easier. If you're diving into topics that are alien to you, it's going to have a different dynamic. So I think I've started to have guests in that arriving for a completely different purpose. So I think we've beaten a lot of dead horses and resurrected a few along the way.
Yeah. So we'll round this out and close it off a little bit. We've talked a lot about the logos and the ethos. Maybe we should touch a little bit on the pathos in closing. And the pathos of it is that if especially if you're a creationist who lives in America or other places that have really strong conservative governments and a really broken educational system, creationism is part of how entrenched powers keep you from realizing the education you've been deprived of. And I would make the call to action that you should start looking for people with better ethos to explain to you these things to you, because as you learn them and as you realize how you've been manipulated and deceived and miseducated and had education deliberately withheld from you, you start to see other things about a pattern of manipulation and control that has defined your life. So that is, I think, why I'm in the fight. I think it's a big part of why you're in the fight too, James. And I hope someone in the audience benefits from that message.
The vast majority, I'm from a non-believer, non-scientific background, and I kind of stumbled into this over the years. But the vast majority of the people who are some of the most articulate people in this regard are ex-creationists. And they were raised in a dogma and doctrine, and they had a worldview on it. And then they got out into the big world and they found out, holy moly, they had been sold a bill of goods. And then you discover what the actual material is, and it transforms you. And you discover how amazing and wonderful. We live in such an astonishingly valuable time. When I think of what information that I have at my fingertips, that I can Google material and have a range. I have the knowledge of emperors at my disposal instantly. Nobody has the justification of being ignorant in this day and age.
And knowledge is one of the ways you can empower yourself. Knowledge is one of the things that can move you up in that social stratification where creationists are getting pushed down by their church, by their political party.
The Speaker of the House of our republic is a young Earth creationist conspiracy thinker who I suspect fact checks what he believes no better than Kent Hovind.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah. So, James, is there anything you want to plug?
Be very afraid.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a website.
We've only begun to fight.
Yeah. There's Evolution Slam Dunk, which you can find both in ebooks and print, and it is a big, thick, literally at the limit of thing. And then Evolution Slam Dunk, That's the reptile mammal transition book that I had written. And if you like fiction, I do that too, evil person that I am. The Paralogs of Phileas Fogg. I've got 2 of those out. I've got a website, tortucan.wordpress.com. Tortucan is my little word I coined to describe the mind shell folk. Yeah. And if you find my videos, Evolution Hour, I put the links to the books and the websites and Patreon and all that in every episode. Because
I'll be there for the next episode for sure. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'll be doing that tomorrow, the ongoing bit with Casey Luskin and all of that, because I contend that source methods is a game that Tortucans cannot play. They're not merely bad at it. They literally can't do it. Their brain glazes over if you ask them, what do you mean check of source? What does that mean? What do you do on it? Well, there's your problem. It's because you're not doing that, and an idea worth having is one worth defending. So the ring of truth about it is that any science or legitimate history or accurate viewpoints of the world are going to be things that you can defend at the data level, you can defend at the factual level because you got the armament. And so what Jackson and I have been trying to do with Evolution Slam Donkey, when he proposed that we do this little project, he was aware of my stuff, and Christine Janis, the mammal paleontologist, was aware of Evolution Slam Dunk, and I only found out about that when I was talking with her when she finally accepted a friend request on Facebook, and and she, it was an excellent book, wonderful. I was modifying some of my views on, didn't know about those Permian hair material that there was, and so I was actually informing her new book that she was going to be doing because she was unaware of some of this technical literature. So I felt kind of good about that. But Jackson, who I bumped into in a variety of areas and started to do videos in that because of Strike, who died tragically in a heart attack some years back, but he was the one that persuaded me to do videos saying that I could tell people things. And he came up with the Evolution Hour idea, and I've been continuing with that ever since. Jackson, at one point on a Zoom, was saying, I'm going to do a book on all of the Answers in Genesis Answers books. And would you like to work with that with me? And it took me all of 1 microsecond to say, hell yes. And so the rest of it is the matter of it. And it's proven, I think, a delightful partnership in this area, because he is at the college level, because he's now has his master's degree and he's moving on and he's a teaching assistant and all that. You have an experience at the college teaching level, very different. Spelling, please, for Tortucan. Tortucan. It's a modification of the Latin word for turtle.
Yeah.
And I wanted a term to describe that mind shell quality, that imperviousness to data. It just bounces off. No matter how many times you throw the information, it just goes kerthunk. And I was seeing that in the behavior of people whose brains just don't go. There's a lack of curiosity. There were just common, but I didn't want it related to what the belief system was. So to say somebody has a Tortucan mind, you're saying nothing about how bright they are. They could be brilliant, they could be stupid. You're not saying whether they're religious or atheist. You're not saying whether they're conservative or liberal. All of that is a separate issue from the thought process that is a methods issue. And my contention is that the Tortucan mind is dangerous to be in political power, because holy moly.
I was just addressing Sydney. I'll add a link to the description.
Oh, yes, for Evolution Slam Dunk. In fact, all you need to do is to put up a link to my latest video, and all the links to all the stuff is right there, because I put that in the video description along with all the source material. So it'll be the direct portal. Plus, they get to see my mug on TV on that. It's a fun thing to do.
Sorry.
Yeah, and the website material, I put a little logo up on it. Peter, who's from Holland, who did my little videos and the advertisement for Rocks Were There and all that kind of stuff. We'll do a new one when we get the next book done. That he lives in Holland, so I've got all this bit. Ian Chen, he's from Australia. We have this international group of people all over the place on that. It's just absolutely astonishing how people can connect up with people from so many different locations today. And so we have a ball to carry.
I think part of that is coming
We have
from
a ball to
people
carry for science.
being concerned about what's going on in America. They're worried about us. It's like your
And the
neighbors
world.
noticing.
There's
Yeah, yeah,
that creationist ethos pops up in other areas. There's and in different cultures, you find in Modi's India, there's what's the equivalent of an extremist religious group that has their own mythologies about the origins of the Hindu culture that tramples over any science data that conflicts with it. You've
yeah,
got Islamic creationist niches. So it bad method can come up in a lot of different areas, and you see it in a lot of political elements, but you have a lot of cross currents, and the current administration is a train wreck of Christian nationalist extremists and political nutballs and people who have attitudes which are at flat earth level, insane bad method. Kash Patel is the head of the FBI,
yeah,
that sort. I mean, these are people that are just shooting off the Tortukan bad methods index. And anybody that is aware of that problem is realizing, oh, these are people who are not going to make things good for anybody because their methods are absolutely screwball. They should never have been in power in the first place, but here they are. So we go through the bumpy ride.
yeah. Oh, oh no, you froze and you
And
roboted
on
out.
that cheery note,
Yeah, yeah.
oh,
So,
sorry. Yeah. Well, we
I
certainly
don't,
had
I don't,
we
I
we,
don't
we
have,
covered a lot of material.
I don't have anywhere near as much to plug. This is pretty much the only thing. I do this YouTube channel where we're talking about evolution because I'm hoping some people will start to understand just how big of a problem creationism is, and that it's kind of like a domino effect, that it's, you know, leading to other forms of science denial, it's leading to political extremism. And if you like what I'm doing,
RFK
go to my
Jr.
page.
Yipes.
Yeah, go to my page, go to my YouTube channel page, and I've got my, you know, my Cash App, my Venmo, my GoFundMe's for my college tuition that I'm struggling to pay like a typical, you know, American middle class at
I've
best.
been there, done that decades ago.
And if you do provide any support through that, I'm going to tell you straight up, you probably won't get much for it. I might mention you by name and give you a thanks in another video, but that's about it. And that's by design. I don't want people thinking that they can influence my content by giving me money. So that is
Well, and
pretty much
in
all I
the
have to plug.
pending economic mess, everybody needs to be very mindful of their resources. And as much as I appreciate things, Dapper Dino does exactly the same little caveat on there that don't chunk any money to us unless you have can spare it. And given the fact that I'm expecting really bad times to be coming in, not way beyond just a little mild stock market blip, everybody hunker down and stay safe until we get through this very murky time.
Yes. And with that, we will conclude this stream. Thank you so much, RJ, for coming over. What a fantastic discussion. You are just an absolute bastion of knowledge about this subject, and I appreciate
And
your
I love the fact
efforts
that we had a
so
live
much.
audience so that we could have some Q&A interaction, because that
Yes.
I just really enjoy that.
Thank you to everybody in the audience who stopped by. Thank you to everybody who's watching this later on. Thank you for liking and commenting and subscribing and all the free ways of supporting the things. And yeah, you're awesome. Thanks, everybody. And we're out.